Thank you everyone for coming. Really, really appreciate it. It seems like a long time since we got together with the still growing committee of 50. I should mention that you won't be surprised to learn we're not at 50 yet. I think we're at about 29 or 30 at this point. Not many of whom aren't able to make it tonight. I promise the next time we invite everyone to get together, we will have our mail technical problems solved. I think we've already figured out how to solve them, so our invitations won't land in your spam traps. And we won't have to invite you 48 hours before the event. You probably didn't hear a great deal from us over the course of the summer from your board. We have not been idle during that time. I'm just going to give you a minute or two on what we've been up to, and then we'll start with the program. It's really been about three things that parts of our board have been involved in over the last 6 or 8 months, something like that. We've had a couple of members of the Mayor's Comprehensive Public Safety Plan Task Force that most of you have probably heard about that. And all I'll tell you at this point is that we are working very hard to see that the Make Oakland Better Now approach to things is recognized by that plan at such time as it's published, which means that we don't forget that police are an important part of public safety. We find out exactly at some point how many police officers the city really needs, because you'll see all kinds of people throwing numbers around, but nobody really knows the answer. That there is an increased amount of transparency in our city's public safety efforts and our city's relationship with its police force, and that we are measuring outcomes at all parts of that effort. We have been talking with a number of people involved in the task force. We've been talking to some elected officials, and these concepts seem to be getting some traction. So stand by. We have been told that there will be a final product released to the public by the end of this year. I have no inside information on that. I'm a little skeptical about that. It may be more like January, but I am optimistic, and I think Bruce can say the same thing, that we're going to, because he's the other member of the task force besides me, that we're going to like what it is that we see. We've been, several of us have been having a lot of back and forth with the ceasefire team, and all the members of the ceasefire team, from social services over to the police department, to the outside consultants. That is, as you've all heard by now, of course, that is an area that is supposed to grow, that is supposed to be bolstered, that is supposed to be given the opportunity to have more of an impact on violent crime than it has so far. And our board is tentatively talking about having a meeting for both the Committee of 50 and the board, and frankly, all comers, in January, where we can have a big community discussion about what's happening and what's going to happen with ceasefire, and again what the metrics are, and when we'll know that we're succeeding with it, and what the role of everybody in it is going to be. We also have a couple of board members who have been working on an issue that we predict is going to become pretty large next year, which is going to be that of police oversight after the end of the NSA. There doesn't seem to be any doubt that there is going to be some measure of some kind. Right now our board has diverse views about what that ought to be and when it ought to be. But what we can all agree on is something is going to come into place other than what we have after the NSA. And it's in the interest of everybody in Oakland that something is all something that works and that makes the police-community relationship better than it's historically been. So those have been kind of the big issues that I suspect you'll be hearing a great deal about all of them after the first of the year. You'll notice our discussion tonight is not for the most part about public safety, which is something we always seem to be the most vocal about. We also stand for transparency and accountability. We think that those are very important items for making city government work and having it accomplish all of the things it needs to accomplish, including making the city safe. And Brenda Roberts, our city auditor, and Whitney Barazoto, the head of the Public Ethics Commission, were kind enough to agree to come and have a Q&A session with us and give us the opportunity to say, what can we do to have these functions of government really make a difference? And that's what we're going to talk about, some of what they're doing, some of what they could be doing in the future. And our board member, Brian Parker, and Port Commission member, Brian Parker, bless his heart, has agreed to be the moderator of that discussion. So unless there's any questions about what we're up to, hearing none, we'll bring up Brian and Brenda and Whitney. Thank you very much.
Either just next to me, whichever order you guys want to stay in.
May I make one technical announcement before? For anybody that hasn't been told that, the facility is behind us.
Yes, so welcome. You guys can move closer. We won't bite. And as we're going on, we've got a bunch of questions written out. So I think since we have such a small, intimate group, we can make it like a fireside chat or what have you. So even during the presentation, just raise your hand and get my attention, and I'll flip back and forth. That way we can get more people involved. And if you don't, I'll start calling on people. I think I'll start with Zach and John Bliss back there. So get your questions ready, guys. All right. So, well, John will go first. That was a good response. So I think first, why don't we just get started? And maybe Brenda, we'll get started with you. Just tell us who you are. Give us a little bit about your bio. I think everybody knows since you were so overwhelmingly elected, but remind those who may not know.
Okay.
Oh, let me pass the microphone. We only have one microphone too, so.
Good evening, Brenda Roberts, City Auditor. My background is really in the audit field. I've been doing this for over 20 years. Audit in Inspector General's office, federal government. I worked in the audit office in our sister city, the one across the bay, San Francisco. I've also worked in audit in other companies you might know of, Safeway, AAA, and those type of companies. I have an MBA in finance, I'm a CPA. So my background is around audit, and I think that brings a lot of professionalism to the office to build on what has already been established and then move forward. I understand the aspects of good internal controls, some audit speak here, and how important that is to make sure that we are getting the revenues that we need, the expenditures are right, and that we have the right milestones, that the programs in place are actually meeting what was intended. So all of that is something that I've done in corporate and government, even in nonprofit type of organizations. So I'm very excited to be here in Oakland. This is a great way for me to give back to my city. I've been here over 25 years, raised 3 daughters here, and this is my hometown, and I'm really very happy to be working with city leaders, department heads, community leaders, and everyone here in Oakland to make Oakland to its very highest, best level. That's my goal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Whitney Barazoto. I'm Executive Director of the Public Ethics Commission, which means I staff the 7-member volunteer board of citizens that serve as our commissioners. My background began working for a county public health program, and I grew really frustrated with the way that decisions were made about funding. And so it drew me to work in the California State Legislature to see how policy is made, how programs are budgeted, and while there, grew really frustrated with the way that policy is made and the way that campaigns are affecting policy at the state level. And so that really drew me to go to law school to look at those issues, to look at the legalities around campaign finance. And then I went to work for the California Fair and Political Practices Commission, which is the state ethics commission. I worked on legislation while there and was part of the executive team. And really grew curious around how we implement policies. The FPPC is very specific, and it's designed to do very specific work. And there were some questions around, well, how effective really was it, especially at that time? and especially around enforcement. And so I went to work for the state commission called the Little Hoover Commission, which looks at state policy and how well it's being implemented to achieve the results for which that policy was designed. And so that then brought me here, where I get to do both government ethics as well as effectiveness, government effectiveness work in the work that we've done with the Public Ethics Commission. Thanks. And I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we're honored to have both of you guys too, and I didn't say it at the beginning, but I see people taking pictures and all that. So as we try to grow to the actual 50 number, if you're Facebooking, go ahead and do that. And if you're tweeting, please go ahead and tweet. And I guess we're using at least the Mobbin tag, and maybe we'll use pound Oak MTG. Bruce, did you have any other tags you wanted to use?
I think Mobbin and Oak MTG would be fine.
Okay, so if you go ahead and tag those and tag pictures, videos, whatever you want to do. All right, I want to go back to both Brenda and Whitney in maybe 30, 45 seconds. Just give us a super high level view of the work of the office. Like, what do you understand, which is the charter of the office to be? We want to ground people in making sure that we're aware of what the work is. So we'll just go in reverse order. Start with you, Whitney.
Basically, our Ethics Commission works in 3 general areas. One is transparency, also campaign finance, and ethics. And transparency, we mean the Sunshine Ordinance as well as lobbyist registration, which allows us to see the activities of lobbyists. We work in the areas of both prevention as well as enforcement, and prevention including educational activities, providing advice to candidates and those who are regulated by our act, as well as providing information and materials to the public. And then we also work in enforcement, which means that we receive complaints, we investigate matters in each of those subject matter areas, and our commission has a whole administrative process and hearing process by which we impose administrative penalties. And that's pretty much what we do.
So the city auditor, there's oftentimes a lot of confusion about what the city auditor does. Actually, in some governments, they call that auditor, whether it's county or whatever, is oftentimes the AP paymaster. So it puts in a different role. So let me explain city auditor in Oakland. The city auditor in Oakland is very common, or is very similar to the background that I explained of mine from before. It is an independent, objective body that provides oversight to the city's activities. So that's oversight to the city's activities. So oftentimes I hear, oh, you count all the money. Well, yes, I do part of that. In fact, when I look at the jurisdiction for the city auditor, we follow the money. So for instance, I'll give you an example of that. So although our jurisdiction is Oakland activities, if the money goes outside of Oakland, for instance, oftentimes the city has given money to the school district. We follow the money out to wherever that is. Those are programs that the school district and the city has worked on together. That would be part of my jurisdiction as well. So yes, I follow the money. I want to see that the money is spent well. But in essence, really, as I was explaining earlier, a good part of what I do is really look at the efficiency and productivity of the city. Every government, particularly municipalities, have a strain on resources. If we can work efficiently and productively, we are leveraging the very limited resources we have, and it is what we owe, and we're obligated to our taxpayers to use those monies wisely. So by that, I interpret to mean use it efficiently. So I look at programs to not say that, did you spend the right money, and did you put it in the right place, and did you collect the right revenues, but did you attain the end result that was intended? Did you meet the goals that was intended? And oftentimes we'll see, were there even metrics put in place so that it could be measurable? So those are kind of things that I come back around to, kind of an audit speak of looking at internal controls again, looking to see that we're working efficiently, and then to make sure that monies are spent, revenues are brought in. The other part of that is we run the Whistleblower Program, which is fashioned after the state mandates of programs and requirements and standards for whistleblower. That means that we are the receptacle for all kinds of reporting that comes into the city from employees and others that have reports of misuse of our resources, abuse of authority or power, or outright fraud. All of those are reviewed, inquired, and run, and investigations are held as well. And where possible, we go after to get reparations back and to get restitution as well. The last thing I'll say, I work with, I would add on to what Whitney has said as well, is I also looking at prevention. In every role I played in audit, I always look at education. So it's one thing to detect and monitor, but the other part is prevention up front. So in my role as auditor in other venues, I've always sponsored fraud awareness or waste awareness type of programs. It's one way for all employees and vendors to make sure that we are applying the city funds, et cetera, in the most high ethical manner.
We'll just hold the questions for a while. I'll just note it, and then I'll come out to the audience. So Brenda, why don't we stay with you for a second? You talked about following the money. You talked about teaching people better. You've been on the job 11 months now. Can you talk to us about some of your biggest accomplishments?
Sure. So I think the first thing is that what I've done in every job in my first 90 days is I step out and I introduce myself and I start the relationships. Because if we don't have a good working relationship, we're not going to get anything done. I cannot get anything done by myself. I need to have those who support the concepts and methods and strategies that I have in place to bring Oakland into a high ethical standard. So that's been the big part of 90 days, and from that I've developed good working relationships within and without of Oakland, outside of Oakland as well. That's all city council, mayor, department head, city administrator, faith-based leaders, everyone, because I want them to be behind me when I say these things are wrong, they need to be changed. I want to be able to have them beside me and alongside me when I say this needs to be changed. That is what I would say is my biggest accomplishment so far. There's a lot of things that have come up around that, and as that builds is where you will see more and more things come out of the city auditor's office that will mean spending money in the right place, making sure we have the right revenues calculated the right way, and our programs are meeting the intended and anticipated results.
Yeah, so why don't you keep the mic for a follow-up, but let's talk about the forward-going then. For the rest of 2015 and 2016, what are some of the things that we can expect from you, and what do you view as your challenges for that period as well?
Well, I'll start with the second part, challenges. Because I believe that I have been so fortunate to set aside a very good foundation of working relationships, I don't see challenges. With the exception of, I am trying to hire and recruit in my department. I'm really rebuilding. Since I came in, we've had retirements, we've had move out of the area, we've had, which is very common in audit shops, shoulders have been tapped and many of my staff have been moved into other departments. That is not uncommon. Auditors are often viewed as highly competent, very well knowledgeable in the business and trade of Oakland, so that's not unusual. So I'm in the process of rebuilding. That would be what I would call my biggest challenge. What I'm looking for going forward is more of the, you will see in subtle changes that expenditures are actually true and right, and the revenues are accounted for appropriately, and that department heads are implementing with metrics of how they determine their success. I think that's a big part of what we need to see as far as accountability. In my other world, we would say there'd be a number of things that measure success within a department, an agency, a group. Budgeting, are you staying within your budget? Every department head should be able to measure themselves to the budget. And then, are they meeting those certain metrics and requirements that they should? Those are some of the things that I'm hoping to build within the city of Oakland. Will it be by the end of this year? I don't think so, but we're going to be continuing to move forward on that. Did I answer your question?
You did, and I'll add a comment, so we'll be waiting for some of those metrics and to see what you do in 2016, because we do appreciate the greater amount of transparency, and I think as we've played back your visit to our board, that's good, and I think these kinds of things will continue to help. So Whitney, Measure CC passed last year, and so maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what that means in practical terms. What's changed, and specifically, what can you do now that you weren't able to do before? Or the department, what can the department do now? Yeah.
Well, typically an ethics commission handles the three areas that I mentioned: campaign finance, transparency, and ethics. And throughout the state, the other city ethics commissions, there are only a couple: San Francisco, San Diego, and LA, Los Angeles. And so what the charter amendment did basically was kind of raise us up to that level. I'd say they were all operating at a level 3, a very effective ethics commission. A lot of them have a great deal of staff. I think LA is around 27 staff, San Francisco maybe around 18 or so, and San Diego is 7 or 8. And then they contract out for their legal support. And so basically, when I arrived in 2012, it was just me and 7 commissioners. We had an additional half-staff position that we were able to acquire, but that was nothing. And there was so much work in terms of education and prevention that needed to be done to make sure that people were aware of the rules and were given the tools that they needed to support them, but also to be able to conduct some complex investigations as well. So that's really raised us up. We now have 6 positions under the new charter amendment. So that alone gives us a great deal of capacity and resources to be able to do our work effectively. But I'd say it's also in coordination with the Government Ethics Act, which was passed also around the same time. The charter amendment passed in November, the Ethics Act passed in December. And that was the real, the other significant gap in what our commission was able to be doing. We were an ethics commission, but we had absolutely no ethics authority to impose penalties for violations of ethics laws, like conflicts of interest violations, bribery, misuse of public resources and funds, solicitation of contributions to staff by elected officials in their capacity as officials. So a whole host of new laws we now have as part of our jurisdiction. A lot of those laws were in place at the state level, but we had no authority to be able to rule or provide a fine at the end of the day on those types of violations. So between the two of those issues, we're going to be seeing a lot more activity by our staff now that we have them. And specifically on ethics violations, which were probably about at least a third of what had been coming in those first couple of years. And so the commission grew quite frustrated having to dismiss cases that looked very interesting and that we really needed to be looking at. But if we didn't have penalty authority at the end of the day, there really is no use for us to even begin an investigation.
Yeah, and we'll stay with you a little bit more. Maybe you talk about some of your accomplishments. I don't know if you guys saw it. When they covered the mayor's race, there were pictures, there were financial reports and that sort of thing. So what are some of the other things that you're proud of? And then as we look into 2016, which will be another election year, what are some of the things that worry you or keep you up at night?
Thank you. I'd say, well, one of the accomplishments that you mentioned is because at the time we had such little resources, this was back before the 2 new laws came into effect, we tried to think about how to best use our platform to make an impact in the areas that we were working. And one of the ways we could do this was by partnering with our Open Oakland friends. Are you familiar with Open Oakland? So this is a group of civic technologists who meet in City Hall every Tuesday evening. And they are supported only by pizza, I think, from the Code for America headquarters. But other than that, are completely volunteer. And they typically are there for 2 to 3 hours, and they're working on their laptops, and they're basically asking as a group, how can we open up city data? So at the time when it was just me and 1 half staff, I said, well, let's give them our campaign data and see what they can do with that. Has anyone ever gone onto the city clerk's webpage and looked at campaign data through the city clerk's site? Okay. It's really cumbersome. It's actually awesome to even have that data electronically, so don't get me wrong, it was wonderful that we moved to that. And yet, when you go to use it and try to find the information, it's very difficult. It's buried in reports, Form 460s, Form 410s, what the heck is that? So, and you really need to know what you're looking for. And so typically reporters are the only folks who can really, and campaigns and their competitors are the ones who can really use that data. Nevertheless,
Get those things right.
so we partnered with Open Oakland, and we took mayoral data, and we had to do a lot of sort of back-end computer gadgetry stuff to make the data upload into a format that can then be used by the civic hackers, who then created a site called opendisclosure.io. And this is where we took the buried reports and created a tool that actually allowed, there were photos of each of the candidates in a row, all of the mayoral candidates, and then we had categories like how many contributions were received inside of Oakland versus outside of Oakland. What was the total amount that the campaign raised? Who are all of the donors to the candidates? You could break down by page. You could click on the candidate and it takes you to their page that then shows a whole list of those who have contributed to that campaign. So it's taking this data, which was really meant to be used by you, the citizens. And so we were able to pull that out and create this really, I think it's a pretty amazing website. I encourage you to use it. It's opendisclosure.io. And it only has mayoral data. So looking ahead, one of the things, and actually one of the new positions, is designed to work on projects like this, to take data that's buried and pull it out and visualize it and work with our partners who can help us do this. So that's going to be a good focus of one of those positions, to be able to be doing things like that. Adding a contractor database, you know, sometimes candidates receive contributions from contractors during the time that the contractor is trying to get the contract with the city. There's no database that tells candidates, hey, don't accept a contribution from this company. Yeah, and so it's difficult to use, and we really want to try and help people be able to follow the laws. So those are a couple of things ahead. In terms of challenges, you know, for us, the charter amendment was passed in November. By January, I had folks asking me, oh, so are you all staffed up? No, we're still not all staffed up. So our budget for the new amendment, we received that in July. So we had to wait until July to begin really doing the recruitment. So we did manage to hire our first new staff last month. It's our new deputy director who will run our enforcement program. And we're working to fill the remaining positions. We have 4 more positions to fill, and those we hope to have filled by January, February. Hope, you know, that's thinking very ambitiously, but it takes a lot of time. It's a huge bureaucracy for us to work through in terms of hiring. So that's right now one of our biggest challenges.
Thank you.
Opendisclosure.io.
Opendisclosure.io. And so we'll take that question. We're going to do one more for each. We're going to go down one level, and then we'll start bringing in the audience. But I think I heard that you were going to cover the city council races in the same way as you covered the mayor's last time. Okay.
I hope.
All right. So something to look forward to for everyone.
You're here.
Code for America. Conference, did anybody go to the Code for America
I did
conference?
not. Any hands out there?
Whitney
The code
was-
for, okay.
Whitney was identified and acknowledged for that.
All right. Let's give her a hand. I think that's great. So, like I said, I'm going to do one more for each person, and then kind of get your questions ready, and I'll have some more in backup if we don't make our way through. But you talked about, Brenda, following the money. You talked about training and education. You talked about prevention. I guess our question is, are these things happening? Are reports happening? Are you getting out in front and talking to people as real time? I want to give you an example. Last month, there were 2 council members that brought a budget amendment that added $1,000, that wouldn't be that big, right? That added $1 million to things that we all care about and agree with, right? Enforcement of tenants' rights, the new minimum wage ordinance, education, seismic retrofitting. The issue, at least as we see it, maybe you could clarify it for us, is that they couldn't identify the $1 million to fund it, so they took the $1 million from the Woodminster Theater's self-insurance fund. The further problem with that is that fund they're self-insured, so it's already underfunded. So the question is, what kind of things did you do during the process to what's going to happen now in terms of documentation? And as things like this come up in the future, how might you approach them?
Thanks for that.
This was collective input, but I guess I didn't get to read it and try to make it all together. How was that?
Yes, that's
Okay.
very good.
All
So, let's go back. The city auditor is part of the oversight and the monitoring role, and so it's very appropriate that city auditor give her opinion, thoughts, and perspective, and that's often done through reports. It's often done in investigations and investigative reports, etc. You're talking about an action that was taken by City Council, and as we all know, City Council has at their availability many resources to pull on for advice and counsel. They have the city attorney, they have city administrator, many experts within the city administrator's office, including people who are very expert in labor law, real estate transactions. They also have all the department heads that are very versed in their own particular areas. They also have the city auditor. So, this is only one instance of times when I regularly talk with, as I mentioned earlier, I regularly talk with city council, city administrator, city attorney, department heads, and I either voice my opinions, concerns, thoughts, and recommendations, and or I am tapped to ask about my opinions, concerns, and perspectives. This was one of those as well. In many cases, I do this behind the scenes. You've seen our city attorney has done those behind the scenes that sometimes didn't always stay behind the scenes appropriately so. For instance, investigations, literally, they are not appropriate to be out in the public, but nevertheless, I do make a very strong voice when I bring a very compelling package together from an investigation that basically says recommendations are to do this. So in this instance, so in other areas, I have actually made that quite public. There was a grantee that earlier this year came to City Council requesting monies. The staff report actually had gone into that and had recommended that City Council go forward and grant the $250,000. I issued a public memo that stated my opinion as to my concerns about likely lack of good internal controls with regards to budgeting, cash flow projections, and managing monies and their program altogether. Nevertheless, City Council went ahead and authorized $250,000 to the grantee. So, in that instance, this is where taxpayers and citizens need to make our City Council and other elected officials accountable, either through their own voice, through the vote, etc. So it's not that City Council doesn't have the means to get the advice, council direction, instruction, but they are that body that they are the decision-making body. The city auditor is not a decision-making body, and it's particularly important to state that. If I were a decision-making body, then I couldn't have the venue to be monitoring and oversight. You can't have it both ways. It doesn't work that way. So, yes, I have been tapped, and I have actually put my voice out there in many and various ways over the last 11 months. Sometimes those are, you probably haven't seen that, or you haven't seen that. That's advice has taken, and sometimes it is not. I would echo that's the same with, I would probably say that the city administrator and the city attorney, maybe even our director here of public ethics, is also nodding, saying, also gave advice and counsel and may not have been taken.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go a little off script and do a 2-for-1 here. One, as we normally do, we recognize our elected officials, and so we have Pat Kernahan, who represented District 2 and was our immediate past council president. Former, and seems happy about that. Seems happy about that. But the other part too, Pat, if you're willing, I wanted to go out to you and say, is that the right tension? You as council president, when you had stuff, is that are you feeling that kind of disclosure and then people coming back to you all, would that have been impactful?
Well, it's impactful with some people. The people who are doing the wrong things don't want to be told they're doing the wrong things.
Sure.
But it
fair.
is very important for the city auditor to weigh in on things that are not quite kosher. I do think that the thing you were talking about on the budget, where they were just sort of, flound, they didn't know where they were going to get their $1 million. I don't know if that's exactly an auditor thing, though I think it's very good to point out that they were really looking at a place that the money wasn't real. But I think that's all you can do. I really don't think that's for the auditor to fix. I think that is more, it should be publicized, it should be made known to the public that this is not a wise way to budget. But I mean, there are actually one of the things I am concerned about is that in the charter, the list of duties of what the auditor's office is supposed to be able to accomplish is ridiculously long. You would need, 60 people in the auditor's office to actually complete all the audits that are listed there. So clearly the auditor is going to have to pick and choose, going to prioritize, what would be the most impactful things to do. But one of the things I like about Brenda is that instead of just, doing an investigation, coming out with a big brouhaha, something that's supposed to be bold and exciting, she's actually working behind the scenes with, developing the relationships and educating people and trying to bring them along so they do the right thing in the first place. And I think that is so much more likely to be effective than the gotcha kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we gotta applaud for that, because that's Pat, thank you for letting us call you, and Zach on the grid is also here from Local 55, so thank you for joining us. We'll go back to Whitney, and I want to go to some numbers and then jump out to the audience. So the last 2 years, there's been something like 33 cases closed. This year, I guess there's 13, 5 resulted in a penalty, 8 had no violation or jurisdiction. In the past 2 years, 12 of these received fines. Just to give you guys a comparison, this was about twice the number from the previous decade. So the question really is, what does this tell us? What are the numbers saying? And are these routine? Are they serious? And are there things that we should all be worried about?
Thank you. Great question, by the way. Well, I think what it tells us is that it's reflective of where our commission is at this moment in time. So in the last 2 years, we've had a number of complaints come in, and we've had to prioritize among them. And the commission chose to prioritize an area that it had the most authority and where we could be most impactful, and that was campaign finance violations. So again, we get campaign finance, we get transparency, and now we're getting some ethics complaints as well that we can actually act on. So because we prioritize campaign finance, we then can look among those and say, well, which ones are the most relevant, timely, important? And at the moment, we chose to look at the most recent election. We thought, there were some cases on our backlog that had dated back 2-4 years. So the ones we felt like were most impactful are the campaign violations that occurred in the last election cycle. So, and at the same time, I think the reflection of the commission's focus is that it really wanted to enforce and show that we mean business when there are rules that need to be followed. And so the cases that you can see in the settlements in the last 2 years, we've done a lot more of them. I'd say they are mostly in the area of contribution limit violations, and specifically where a business has given a contribution as well as an individual. And there are some kind of complex rules in that area that say you can't contribute if you have a certain amount of ownership in the business. And for some businesses, that can be a little bit complicated. Nevertheless, it's still a violation. So there were several of those, I think, among that list. There were contribution limit violations. There were
any serious breaches of public trust is at least a piece of what we're trying to get.
I'd say contribution limit violations are serious. I put that in the serious, especially given our prior authority. But in terms of the ethics violations, misuse of public funds, intentional violations, no, we haven't had those kinds of cases. We haven't had them brought to us. We haven't had the resources to pull those and do proactive investigations and audits that can reflect things like that. So I think, again, the list reflects our moment in time now, given our authority that we had in 2014, and that it also reflects the transition and the need to prioritize the cases. Yeah, but I think, under the Ethics Act, there's a lot of potential that the commission will be moving forward and looking into. So I'd say the seriousness of the violations and the complexity of the cases will certainly grow.
Okay, thank you. And I think unless it comes up with our audience questions, we want to double back on lobbying. And then, given that you are so understaffed, you've got this volunteer board, now some positions, what can groups like Mobbin do to help you? But I think I saw Dan in the audience with a question, and then I'm going to come down. Dan, please. Or you want me to go here first?
I had a fairly simple scope question for the auditor.
Sure. Let me pass this.
2 parts. One, do you have any jurisdiction over the spending of the school board? And second, do I understand correctly that you can go and see, for example, when we pass a city measure that increases taxes in one way or another and dedicates money to public safety, you go in and audit whether that money is being spent the way it was supposed to and whether it's achieving what we want to achieve?
So I'll start with the first one. So I don't have jurisdiction over the school board. In fact, they have an audit committee and they have an external auditor that works with them. And you understand that the Oakland School District was taken over by the state. It's now been returned back to the...
For some time, right.
Yeah. But as I mentioned before, the city auditor by charter is focused on Oakland activities. So those activities would necessarily be defined by monies that are provided. So most of the time, what we're looking at is monies through grants that are, many of these are often through ceasefire type programs that are in conjunction with the school district. So we may give the money, but the school district, excuse me, the school district may be partnering that they provide some of the services, or they're on school property, things like that. So yes, we would have the venue to go in and audit, determine that the monies are spent where they should and the milestones have been met based on the contract if it's a grantee, that type of thing. Did I answer that?
Well, then things like Measure Z and others, do you go in and see whether, for example, Measure Z, is it the money being spent the way it's supposed to? Is the committee set up the way it's supposed to be? Have they set metrics for whether they're achieving them and those sort of things?
Yes, now Measure Z, that's a successor to Measure Y.
Right.
Right, okay. So Measure Z, because that fund and program receives federal monies, it will come under what we call a single audit. And so, oh, thank you. And so, excuse me. That means that our external auditor will audit both the financial statements of that organization and will also conduct certain internal control testing. I do a follow-up to make sure that there's no findings, or if there are findings, that they're remediated. So I work with the external auditor somewhat as a liaison. But those type of measures are already audited under a single audit. So I don't want to duplicate our efforts to provide redundancy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
So I have a question, but if I might, that has been historically, as both a citizen and as a volunteer, the biggest disconnect is the acceptance of the term auditor versus city auditor. And that you aren't their internal audit. In fact, if Sabrina wants to build an internal audit function, she's able to. She can expend the funds to do so, et cetera. And I know you and I have had conversations about that. And you're also not the independent external auditor. You're not the firm that does the annual audit. And when there are measures that stipulate external audit, it usually is performed by our external independent auditor. And you're more our auditor, those of us that elect you, to look for performance and effectiveness, etc. But I can tell you, based both on the question and the interactions over the last I don't know, ever since I moved here in 1992, that it's not well known in the city by the populace that distinction between the definition of auditor. And so if you can help, that would be fantastic.
So if I may, yes, as we just talked about Measure Y, Measure Z, that's audited under a single audit, and that's by our external auditors or contractors of our external auditors. They do two things. They look at the financial statements, and those of us who are accountants and CPAs know that we go through the balance sheet and we absolutely, we smash it down and audit everything around it. We vouch to all the stuff, okay. But they also look at internal controls as well, which makes that different than other types of financial statement auditors. Our external auditors, which I believe is Patel, they audit the CAFR, but they audit from a financial statement. That is, they go through the balance sheet and P&L, profit and loss, differently stated for our government. And they audit all those numbers to determine that they're backup and support. That's financially based. I do some of that too, but primarily I also look at the performance side, which means that are we meeting the performance metrics that we should? So, for instance, some of the audits that we might do include are we making the wildfire audit that we're going to be issuing a follow-up on? There's some of the money side of it. Are we sending out invoices for inspections and for remediation, for abatement for the properties? But also, are we doing the inspections and are we performing that correctly? There's other things that come in that as well that an external auditor would not focus on because they're looking again at the financial statements. So this role here as city auditor really is more wide scope. But having said that, I do look for, as we said before, I work with the external auditor and any other compliance type based. I work with EDD and other agencies so that we're not redundant. I'd also work with the auditors of the OSUD. So we're not redundant, we're not duplicating efforts, and we're complementing each other. That provides a very strong net, and a very strong net of oversight and monitoring. Does that help?
Yeah.
I look at compliance, I look at efficiency, I look at financial reporting, all of that.
Did that take care of your question?
No,
Okay,
my
let's go there.
question really had to do with what you both are saying your immediate challenge is, which is trying to staff up to hire. And so now I'm going to ask the question as a volunteer in the city watching other initiatives flounder for the lack of being able to hire and fill positions and how long it takes within our system. First of all, are you operating within the city civil service and within HR? And did you expect it to be what you're finding it to be?
You know, yeah, I actually did expect it to be a little bit of a slog. So I've worked for state government for many years and participated in that HR process. So far, I'm actually pretty impressed with how quickly we've been able to move. I mean, originally I had big goals of having all the positions filled, you know, within a couple of months, and I think I sort of had forgotten. Oh yes, especially with brand new positions, which we have, which there isn't a city position elsewhere where you can pull from an existing pool of candidates, for example. So to create an entirely new position and go through the full job analysis and make sure that the Civil Service Board buys into your job descriptions and the new positions and the salary and all of those, I'm actually pretty impressed with how we've been able to get a lot of that done in only a couple of months since our budget passed. So I think this is pretty common and typical. And I also hear from other departments their challenges too. And I'd say we're pretty lucky that I believe that we've been somewhat prioritized because it's charter amendment and budget implementation. And I think it's moving as it should be. I don't have any suspicions about being kind of pushed aside or looked past.
So what's the new hope from your point of view? Since it used to be a couple of months, when do you expect to be staffed?
My goal is January, February of the coming year, so within the next 3 to 4 months, that's my goal. I'm
Positions
sticking
are-
to it.
Positions are already
We'll
posted.
let you come back
They're
for the rest.
actually, the remainder of the positions are posted, are opening recruitment officially this coming Monday.
Brenda, you okay with that, or did you have a different perspective you wanted to add in?
Well, it's a little different perspective.
Sure, please.
I'm glad that Whitney's able to do the hire. It's still a long process. I'm frustrated that it does take an awfully long time. It just takes a long time. And there's so many, it's the maze of trying to get through it is just unbelievable.
So streamlining. Thank you. I think we had, Pat, were you going to insert on this? Please.
Yeah, did the council even give you enough slots that if you were able to fill them, it's enough to do your work?
For me?
I
Yes.
think she says no.
No.
Please, if you want.
In fact, in a prior administration, the city attorney had acknowledged that the city auditor's office was already understaffed. So we'll stand by that. I lobbied for another position, wasn't able to get that, but we did get some monies to help with some consulting to fill in those spaces.
Okay. So we've got a little queue building, which is great, because I think we're having a good discussion. So just put your hand up and I'll get you. So Joe, Bruce.
Other Bruce?
The other Bruce, and then the other Bruce. Yeah, that's right, there's a lot of Bruces. Okay. Joe, please.
Well, actually, a question.
And I don't think Whitney had any investigations on you, so you should be, it should be clear. Oh, well, maybe Joe's going to correct the record. Obviously, Whitney took Ruby. Joe and I get to be posted.
I want to actually address the questions for Whitney, but I want to sort of tee off of the last point that I think was the larger thing that Pat was being too polite to say. I find it.
And Joe, would you talk just a little bit?
I find it a major ethics violation and a problem of our system that the people who are, would be investigated by an auditor's office or by an ethics commission control the budget for those. If conflict of interest is one of the components of things you look at, and we have a structural conflict of interest here that I think needs addressing. And
Keep that in mind when you get to be my supervisor relative to the judges in this county.
well,
Thank you for the free plug.
Just
No, but I
I
think
don't really
that's.
see how it's as dumb as asking Congress to pass meaningful campaign finance legislation. They'll never do it if it's not in their interest to do it. So this is a real issue here, frankly, and it's something that I think bears more investigation. But Whitney, actually, what I wanted to come to you with was a larger question about semantics, I guess. You talked about your jurisdiction and your interests, I guess, as a commission being government or public ethics, which I think are the same thing, which to me, by the way, means stewardship. I don't know if that's how you see it, but are you being a good steward with the public coin? Are you representing the people in the ways you're supposed to? Campaign finance laws, and then what you call transparency. Campaign finance is complex enough all by itself that to be folded into a house that's about stewardship, to me seems like there's no place for this to go, so we're going to put it here. And it almost seems like, as it is at the state level, it should be its own beast. The transparency issue, I guess, is an ethics question. I don't know if it's illegal not to do it. It's just maybe not right that we make it so difficult for people to find out about things. But I wonder, I guess, I mean this as a meaningful question, is why are we calling this a public ethics commission when it's a house that's responsible for more than that? And I think part of the reason maybe people in the public don't know what to do, or what the ethics commission does, is that you're asked to do a lot, and it may not always be clear how these things are ethical issues as opposed to violations of state law or local laws or whatever. Can you really do all this? Or is it too much? I mean, should these be separate entities? I guess is the question.
Thank you. That's a really great question. In fact, when I arrived at the commission, one of the questions I was wrestling with was how could we possibly be called an ethics commission and not have an ethics law? The laws we had were campaign finance and transparency. And in other states and other cities, there are a lot of different types of commissions like ours. There are many elections commissions. who only look at elections and campaign finance issues. There are, I'd say typically if it's called an ethics commission, they have a little bit more of an all-inclusive focus. Honestly, when I arrived, I toyed with trying to see if we could change our name to be called the Government Integrity Commission. That would then be an umbrella term that would loop in ethics, campaign finance, and transparency. Most of the other local commissions don't cover transparency. San Francisco actually has a task force that does that. And other than that, San Diego and LA only do ethics and campaign finance laws. So, and even our state ethics commission, I mean, not to get kind of bore you with all the details, but even the state ethics commission really deals with campaign finance, lobbying, and a couple of ethics provisions. Whereas the rest are more through the Attorney General's office, things like misuse of public funds and things like that. So we're all kind of different, and it does make it challenging as an industry to set a standard for here's how we do ethics commission work, if it's an ethics commission. Even Sacramento, I don't know if they decided on a name yet for their proposed ethics commission, but they were toying with the idea of an integrity commission instead, to then be a little bit more umbrella. Now the challenge on the flip side is we tend to get calls from folks who think everything is an ethics issue, a policy decision, that they disagree with is an ethics problem for them. And so I'd say the challenge at the moment for me is typically in that area where people think we do more than we really can do. But your point is well taken. It's one that we've kind of wrestled with a little bit internally in terms of semantics.
Just a quick follow-up. Again, in terms of the appearance of tribe, the ethics commissioners themselves are volunteers, but they are recommended, I think you can correct me, I may be ignorant of how this process works, and appointed by council, or how does it work?
No, so we have, I actually really like our makeup, and it's very unique to Oakland. We have 7 members. 4 of those members are appointed by our own commission through a very public application process. We open it up to the world, accept applications, and have a subcommittee review them, interview them, and nominate a couple of finalists to go before the full commission, and then the full commission decides on the next member, and that happens once a year. Occasionally it's for 2 seats, but typically it's 1 seat each year that our commission appoints. The remainder 3 used to be solely by the mayor, and now that is split through the new charter amendment, so that the mayor has 1 appointment, the city auditor now has 1 appointment, and the city attorney's office also has 1 appointment, which I think is a really great way to distribute that appointment process. I also wanted to mention, going back to your question about how we are funded, one of the beautiful things of the charter amendment is that our funding is now in the charter. So if there's a change to that, there needs to be an urgency finding by council, which would be a very public urgency finding process, that there's a severe budget shortage or whatever it is. Otherwise, our 6 positions, and specifically the positions are identified in the charter, have to be the minimum funding guaranteed each year. So it's pretty darn permanent. And that was one of the pieces that we really pushed for, is to, from a budget perspective, be very independent. Another interesting tidbit is that my position now serves solely at the pleasure of the commission. Previously, there was some supervisorial role that the city administrator played, and we were tucked inside the city administrator's office. So again, part of the charter amendment was to really break us out from within city government and create that better independence. So that's really helpful for us.
Bruce, I'll win back. Yeah, you're 3. Yeah.
I have a big global policy kind of question for both of you. At least I think it's good. In being involved in this organization over the last 7 or 8 years, whatever it's been, and being involved in some political campaigns during that time, I've found that there's 2 interesting influences going on. One is, like everywhere else, you have a very large percentage of low information citizens. They're not inside policy geek types like you see at an event like this. And the second thing is, throughout the city, you find an enormous amount of distrust. and an assumption that things are dysfunctional, an assumption that money is being misspent, that money is being inequitably spent, and so forth. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that those things combined stand in the way of city government being able to accomplish a lot of things it ought to be able to accomplish. So from the point of view of our executive director of the Public Ethics Commission and our city auditor, who's an elected official, if you could redesign the world in some way, or in the municipal environment in some way, how would you get us past all of those issues so that A, we had a government you were satisfied was trustworthy, and just as importantly, everybody out there knew that we did, so that when government called on the citizens to do something, they were being called on by somebody there, an entity that they trusted. I told you it was a big global question.
I'd say one of the first things that's, I'm kind of wrestling between a couple of things, but I think to answer the latter part of your question, what could we do differently? I saw such enormous value from collaborating with the Open Oakland group. And not only because it produced a really effective tool for our commission and for the citizens, but what I saw was individuals, citizens who previously knew nothing about the work that we did and how we did it, and the challenge of the laws and the complexity of the reporting rules and the forms that are required to be filled out by candidates. The beauty was watching citizens learn that. And I think through efforts like your group here and folks like Open Oakland, and where we have citizen groups kind of gelling around different causes, really helps that conversation.
You know, we have a board member that's part of Open Oakland. You're aware of that?
Who is that?
Mikey Bell.
Oh, okay, yes.
He's our board.
Yes.
He can't be here tonight, but he's a
Excellent.
board member.
So as much as we can facilitate that kind of engagement, I mentioned the position that's going to be working on the e-filing systems and the disclosure that we do. I would like to see a little portion of one of our positions be more of an engager and get out in the public, share more about what we do and how we do it, and also help provide more information about how other types of city services work. I mean, we get a lot of phone calls from people just trying to find a service. So as much as we can weigh in and help guide that type of engagement process, that's certainly within our jurisdiction to be advocating for in terms of transparency. And so that's at a kind of a big policy level, some of our interests as well.